Hello, my name is Bill Chaffin, and I'm the Speakers Director of UCLA Campus Events.
And my name is John Weinberg, President of the Graduate Students Association. Today's program is co-sponsored by Campus Events of the Undergraduate Students Association, the Graduate Students Association, and UCLA's Student Health Services. Welcome to the second of a series of lectures designed to address student concerns related to the AIDS epidemic. This series is dedicated to the memory of Dale Hansen, a UCLA graduate student who died of AIDS.
Our last program in the series dealt with safer sex and featured the advice of Dr. Ruth Westheimer and UCLA's own Dr. Dennis Kelly. In that program, we learned that the best way to avoid AIDS, short of abstinence, is to change one's behavior and practice safer sex. Further, we discussed how AIDS cannot be looked upon solely as a gay disease or a disease of IV drug users. Everyone should consider themselves at risk and take the necessary precautions. Not to do so could be fatal.
Dr. Ruth and Dr. Kelly also helped dispel some of the common myths associated with the transmission of the HIV virus. For instance, there is no evidence to suggest that one can get the disease by casual contact with an infected person. You cannot get the disease by touching someone who has AIDS.
Which brings us to today's topic and a panel discussion about the personal and psychological effects of AIDS. Not only with persons with AIDS, but with individuals, students at UCLA, who need help dealing with the stress and fear of a world where AIDS is a reality.
Before we begin, we'd like to remind you that there are mics at either side of the audience for you to ask the panel questions. We'd like to now introduce one of our guests, who will then introduce the rest of the panel and serve as co-moderator for today's program.
She is a movie and stage actress whose personal commitment to AIDS education has earned her the respect not only of the Hollywood community, but of AIDS activists across the nation. Her concern about the disease has prompted her to devote much of her time to the cause. She has hosted, for example, an informative video aimed at heterosexuals, which answers many questions related to the transmission of the HIV virus.
She has testified before a congressional hearing on AIDS education. She co-hosted an informational television special and has participated in numerous smaller local benefits. She is an individual who has truly made a contribution to AIDS awareness, education, and the needs of persons with AIDS. Ms. Morgan Fairchild. Sorry about that.
I just gained a husband. I wish. Hi, thank you all for coming today. It's really nice to have so many people here and to show such an interest in this issue. I think we have a real interesting panel put together for you, so if you have any questions, I'm sure there'd be somebody here able to answer almost anything you can come up with. And knowing that you're college students of a certain age, I'm sure you have very imaginative questions. Our first guest is Dr. Sonia Friedman. She hosts a 2-hour program, Sonia Live in LA, on the Cable News Network, which includes interviews, news reports, and daily features on such topics as health, nutrition, and finance. I'm sure all of you have caught this show. Would you please welcome Dr. Sonia Friedman. Our next panelist is Dr. Daniel Klein. He's a psychiatrist here at UCLA's Student Health Services. He is also an assistant clinical professor of psychiatry at UCLA Medical School and a member of the American Psychiatric Association. We all need help. Our next panelist we'll call Anne. She is 34 years old. Anne, would you like to come on out here and I'll tell about you a little bit while you're coming out. She's 34 years old. She was diagnosed a year ago. She had symptoms 4 years ago but didn't find out that she had the HIV virus until she had an operation. She is currently taking AZT and is in the early stages of ARC. This is Anne. Lance is a 25-year-old student. He was diagnosed 6 months ago. He had symptoms for a year. He's had one bout of pneumocystis, but is asymptomatic at this time. Lance? Mark is 25 years old. He's a grad student at UCLA. He tested positive in September of '85 and has had safer sex since '84. He is outwardly healthy. Looks good to me. Is there room for me up there? They gave us a few questions. Can you hear me? You down front can hear me. Can anybody in the back hear me? Okay, I hope this is on. They gave us some of these questions that people from the audience had asked. To any of the 3 persons with AIDS up here who were tested, do people treat you differently now that they know you've tested positive for the AIDS virus? Anne, would you like to go first on that?
Most people do. Some positively and some negatively. I have close friends I've known for over 10 years who now have just backed right away. And I have other friends who have been very supportive and have become closer and really, I think, value friendship much more so than I think that they really valued previously. So it goes both ways, but there are very few people that do know. I only told the rest of my family just recently, and that was very difficult for me to do. So it's otherwise there's no one where I work that knows, so I go to work every day playing pretend, which is incredibly difficult because it's a real terror to have to worry about people that I work with finding out. So
well, then it
people do
takes
treat
great
differently.
courage to be here in front of an audience and to identify yourself. And one of the things I think we all respect is that when we get together in a group such as this, in some ways we're paraprofessionals and we hold your identity near and dear to us and would not do something that could in some ways be harmful to you. But I want to ask you a question so that we move right into this and using the time. It is surprising perhaps for some to see a woman up here. And as you may know, on my show about a month ago, without offending you or getting too personal, without really setting rapport, we had an OBGYN psychiatrist from New York State Medical School who said on the air to 54 countries, not 30 years ago, but a month ago, that no heterosexual female could get AIDS unless she participated in anal sex or was an IV drug user. So without making you wildly uncomfortable, since we have a physician in the field who represents the traditional medical authorities, I wonder if you could tell us a little bit about how a beautiful 34-year-old heterosexual female finds herself on this panel.
I've never been an IV drug user, and I'm sure that I did not get this from having anal sex. I most likely contracted this sexually with a male partner, but I cannot be sure if that is indeed how I got it. And the doctors don't know either. When I first came down with symptoms 4 years ago, they refused to test me because I was a woman, and they said there's just no chance. This is back in '83 when they first had come up with the test for this. So they totally disregarded any possibility of my having this disease and labeled it as a variant form of another illness. I recovered from that, and so time went on, and and not until I was diagnosed last year did I have to start putting together my activities from those 4 years ago and previously. So there aren't any extreme ways that I could have contracted this. It's very difficult to say. It's something that's out there, and you just have to be very careful who you're with. So I really don't know.
Would the two gentlemen like to answer this first question about how do people treat you any differently? Lance?
Well, let's see. At first, no, because I only told 2 or 3 very, very close friends, including someone I'd been in a relationship with about a year. The person I've been in a relationship with took it actually very well, better than I think most people would. Most people would probably freak and leave the relationship and just hate me or whatever. I was very fortunate. The person loves me very much, and we've been together now 16 months throughout this whole thing. My other friends I gradually told, and most of them were very accepting because some of them have been tested positive as well. I was not as fortunate as most that are just tested positive. I became very sick. I lost 30 pounds, had to go in the hospital. I came out. Now I'm on AZT, and I've completely recovered. I have no symptoms whatsoever. So I was really, really lucky.
When you say you've completely recovered, could we just step back for a moment?
Sure.
I don't know if the doctor would like to, but recovered in terms of being asymptomatic is different from recovered in terms of being asymptomatic may be a little different from recovered, and I just wonder if we don't let that go by for just a minute, Doctor.
Okay.
Well, I think you made the point that there is a distinction there, and there's also a distinction on the panel between being tested positive as well as having either ARC or AIDS, and that the people on the panel do represent the spectrum of what people encounter. But in terms of recovery, no one knows enough about this illness to say whether it's recovery, remission. It becomes semantics.
I mean,
I
my
guess you're right.
understanding is this virus is like any other, like a herpes virus or other viruses. As far as they know right now, once you have it, it stays in your body all your life. So it's not like when you say recovered, you're saying, oh, I got over the flu or something.
That is correct.
Okay, I see your point. That's right. So I am at this point asymptomatic, so doing much better than I have.
Don't mean to quibble. We just want to be clarified here. Mark, would you like to answer that question?
Yes. First, I'm only HIV positive. I don't have ARC or AIDS yet. And I've told everyone in my life, my family and my friends, and the response has been pretty good. I have a different situation in that I'm not involved in a relationship. So I meet people, and before I consider dating them, I'll tell them that I'm HIV positive. And about 80% of the people have reacted favorably. It hasn't stopped them.
Dr. Klein, I have a question for you from the audience. What services are available on campus here if a student wants to talk about AIDS or is deciding whether or not to test for the virus?
There are a number of different options on campus and within the community of Los Angeles. Specifically on the campus, Student Psychological Services offers individual as well as group counseling. There are groups specifically designed for gay and bisexual men, the Gay Men's Rap Group and the Psychotherapy Group, and certainly AIDS and HIV testing come up as subjects. Individually, the entire staff is trained to deal with issues related to persons, whether they have to do with AIDS, ARC, whether to get tested or not, or the whole spectrum. All a registered student has to do is come to our offices or call our offices, and they will be seen.
I should remind everybody, too, if anyone from the audience has a specific question that they would like to ask, there are the microphones over here on the side. To, again, any of our three panelists who've been tested, do you have any advice for individuals in the audience who may be sexually active? I mean, is there anything you would suggest for people in this particular audience? Ann?
I do. I moved here from Texas in '83, and at that time, the AIDS epidemic in Dallas, people really didn't think about it very much, and it was considered a segment of the gay population, a part that I didn't run in. And then I moved out here, and of course AIDS was a little more happening, and so I took the test, and I was positive. And I would encourage anyone out there, while you can take the test anonymously, to do so while we still can. And if you're negative now, you're lucky, because I've practiced safe sex for 4 years, and I had to have been exposed before then, before we even knew the virus was out there.
I would like to ask the panelists, if I may, a question, and for any of the three of you. We started to talk about this a little bit before we came out here. You indicated that you tell partners that you're HIV positive, Mark. would it be so that anyone who had this disease felt that kind of responsibility? And I shared with you a story that came up last weekend about a 40-year-old male who has been exclusively gay with multiple partners all of his life and is now, is now getting married to a heterosexual female, a physician, as it turns out, has neither shared with her that he has a gay past, nor will he consider taking the test, and he specifically wants children. It is suggested that a woman who has AIDS, that if a woman has AIDS, 50% of children born to her will also have the virus. Now, what is the responsibility of people, not only who have AIDS, that's an easy question, but of people who know that someone is HIV positive? Do you recommend that people get involved and ask partners if they know? And this is for all of you.
Well, I think everyone has to make that decision for themselves as whether or not to take the test and to tell their partners. The problem is, of course, with AIDS, you face discrimination. Being gay or HIV positive, if there were laws that prevented discrimination in employment or housing everywhere, not just in LA, then testing would not be a problem. But right now, I would encourage testing only because it's anonymous. And that may change. And that's why I'm saying take the test now while you
But
can.
you didn't answer my question. I mean, if I may. The question was, if you weren't telling and you were with someone, do you think that those around have a responsibility to tell that other person if you have the knowledge that the individual isn't?
Okay, I can only answer that as to whether I would tell and get involved. I don't know if most people, it's a personal decision. I haven't faced that situation yet, and that's a difficult situation. How would you respond?
I will tell you. Oh, I'll tell you how I respond. Oh, I never ask a question unless I'm prepared to answer it, ever. Nor do I suggest you ever do the same if you want to have integrity. I will tell you how I responded. I responded that I thought the best friend of this person, and this was the messenger who asked me the question at dinner, was the best friend of the closest friend to someone who was going to see this couple the following week. And I said that life is like a cat's cradle. I didn't have this answer immediately. I will tell you very honestly, I slept on it, woke up the next morning and called him with this because you have to separate out the issues. I think the man has a right to maintain non-disclosure concerning his sexual past, and frankly, we all do. On the other hand, I think that to inject someone with a lethal disease is something that we all have to take a look at. And so I suggested that they have dinner in San Francisco where he was meeting with them. At the end of the dinner, as he was paying the check, he looked at the two of them, and fake names here, of course, and he say, Jack, Sarah, I have to tell you something. A woman that Jack was involved with several years ago has become HIV positive. I know the two of you have been living together. I think you should both be tested for your own sake. And then watch the look of surprise on both Jack and Sarah's face. That's how I would handle it, because I believe in being involved as being alive and helping. If you're going to participate and be an activist, don't make it so narrowly selective that the culture can't even survive.
I think we have a couple of gentlemen over here that would like to ask a question.
Yes, good afternoon, Morgan.
Hi.
Nice to see you here at UCLA.
Thank
And
you.
My name is
I'm
Thomas
sorry, I
Love-
didn't hear that.
My name is Thomas Lovejoy, and I also would like to say hello to a good friend of mine, which is Sonia Freeman. I work with her at Channel 4 in Detroit.
Oh, wow.
How you doing, Sonia? Long time no see. One question. No, it's a couple of questions. For one, I'm not going to ever cross up an XX with an XX and an XY with an XY. If we're all biology students out here, we know what that means, right? The males are the XYs and the females are the XX. Now, come on. Now, for one, they have a new kit. I would like to ask the doctor up there. Do you think that it's safe to try this new kit out that they have for home testing of AIDS?
Well, my resource of information for that is the medical journal called the Los Angeles Times, as well as some other popular press. To me, personally, it seems I'm not sure of what the ramifications of drawing your own blood. They didn't explain exactly how that would be done, but you have to draw the blood, put it in a vial, and transport it to a center where they will give you your results, and they said counseling over the phone. The most important thing about being tested has to do with being counseled, to have someone to share your feelings with. I think it's very important to have anonymous testing to get more people in to get tested. I think information is very useful, and it should be readily available as it is in the city and even on this campus. But I'm concerned about sending blood through the mail, and also about how do you draw blood on yourself.
That's a good answer. And number
Thank you.
Glad you liked it.
Number two, I know that we have to commune and communicate in regards sexually, because it's only natural that we do so, because in order to reproduce ourselves, that's a natural existence. I think that we shouldn't stop dating, but I want to ask this one thing. Doc, don't you feel that, well, I want to ask Morgan, do you feel that we should specify that the existence of a prophylactic should be used in all sexual intercourses, even on the first date?
Honey, if you've got it on the first date, she ain't playing hard enough to get. Dr. Klein, would you like to address that one first about that, or?
The question isn't safe sex. The question is less risky sex, and any steps that you can take to make your sexual expressions less risky, I think you should go ahead and take.
Is that it?
That's
Okay.
it.
Okay. I didn't know if you were finished. I didn't want to jump in. First of all, I mean, I think it would be better to get to know somebody a little bit better than the first date before you hop into bed with them anyway. But secondly, it's what Dr. Klein just said is very true, and I tried to stress this in the video I did with Dr. Gottlieb, who diagnosed AIDS, which is that there is no such thing these days as safe sex. There is safer sex. And part of that is getting to know the person better before you hop into bed with them, so you have a little idea of what their background is, hoping that they'll be honest with you. And you know, like Sonia was just saying, that's not always necessarily the case. People are not always honest. But if you get to know somebody a little better, you will know more about them, you will know more about their background, you'll know better about their character. And then I think it is wise to try to use a prophylactic until you decide that you want to be committed to somebody. So, yes.
Hello, Ms. Fairchild and everyone on the panel.
Oh, you can call me Morgan.
Okay, Morgan. I am homosexual, so I'm the guy who would put the XYs with the XYs. Mm-hmm. And my question to you basically is my problem with the entertainment field. The media. We still see, even though all of us know how deadly AIDS is, we still see in Hollywood, the beautiful woman, the hot, steamy love scenes. Where's the box of condoms? I mean, it's still, to me, I'm getting the message that it's still a gay disease. As far as the media is concerned, as far as Hollywood is concerned, we must save this image of AIDS is down here. We've got to perpetuate Hollywood here, and we've got to sell blue jeans, we've got to sell hairspray, we've got to sell this, that, and everything else. When are they going to get a clue?
Well, it is a capitalist society, so they do continue to try to sell those things. I've been very heartened in the last year, and I was part of the AIDS task force with Dr. Koop out here on what Hollywood is doing about it earlier this fall. I think that some people within the industry are taking a lot of interest in this. Certainly, certain responsible producers are more interested than others. And in inserting little references even as throwaway lines, as opposed to you don't have to do a whole TV movie or something on AIDS. But, for instance, in Dragnet, Tom Hanks wakes up and has a gorgeous girl in bed and his condom box is empty and he decides not to have sex, or in Stakeout when Richard Dreyfuss has slept with the girl, Emilio Estevez says, "Oh, did we practice safer sex?" And I mean, even jokes, but the things that to keep stressing that is out there, that it is a possibility, I think is very important. I mean, this was the first time we've ever had a James Bond in bed with one woman, so
Right.
I think people are trying to start taking a more responsible attitude. I know Barney Rosenzweig from Cagney and Lacey and some of the other producers have managed to throw different things in there, and they are trying, but it's a business where people are out to make money, and it doesn't happen overnight. Every time somebody like you writes to one of those networks of producers and says, "Why are you being irresponsible?" you make them stop and think, "Oh, maybe we better do something."
So slowly but surely, you think things are changing and turning
It's just
around.
like the rest of the country. We've had to educate people, and it doesn't happen overnight. You have to make people aware that this is a problem that they are also partially responsible for.
And also, I'd like to say it really is nice to see someone like you. I mean, someone who, and I don't want to say I grew up with, but from Flamingo
You better
Road.
not.
From Flamingo Road and from the movies you've done. Someone who is I would say the pinnacle of heterosexuality. I mean, someone who,
Everlasting youth and beauty.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Getting involved, but thank you.
Thank you.
Excuse me. Hello.
I've got a question for the persons who tested positive for the HIV virus. What kind of counseling have you gone through to deal with this disease?
Well, I'll talk. When I first had it done, I went to a health center that did it free of charge, and they had counselors there that took me in before I took the test to help me decide whether I wanted to even do it or not, because psychologically it's very difficult to go through, emotionally, etc. When I was told I was positive, they had a counselor there as well. They had umpteen programs for me to go and do. So I went to a couple of them, went to like one group therapy thing. I went to a couple of just personal one-on-one basic things. Then I had lots of friends too. So if you have friends that you can trust, that's a real positive thing. If you don't have friends you can trust, it's better to go to a counselor. So that would be my advice.
Anybody else?
It was very difficult for me to find a support group in that I'm a woman, and because this unfortunately has been labeled as a gay disease, there were very few support groups for women exclusively. And I found it difficult, first of all, to talk to just anyone about it. I did start seeing a therapist on the recommendation of my gynecologist, who actually was the first person that ran the test and diagnosed me. She was actually shattered. I was her first patient that ever tested positive for this. And she felt absolutely devastated to have to tell me. So she suggested I might consider speaking to a therapist, which I have and still am doing. Even though she is healthy, it's still difficult in a way to speak to someone who is not afflicted with the illness, because no one really knows and understands what it feels like to have to live with this 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, and to get up and face the world and keep this big dark secret inside and try and function as a normal person. I have a couple of very close friends, male friends, who unfortunately have just recently been diagnosed positive, and we all have just really clung together. And so it's been very difficult to find the right kind of support and counseling from the right people. The only other person is a very, very close girlfriend who, thank God, has just been there and understanding and stood by me even in my worst moments. I was in a total state of shock, I think, for the first 6 months. I just went to work and I just functioned on autopilot for at least 6 months. I didn't even know who I was or what was really happening, but that I just had to keep going somehow. And once I snapped out of that, I realized I could still live and function as somewhat of a normal person, but I had to be very selective about how I continued and carried on my life in an entirely different way than I ever could have thought possible or ever been prepared for. It's the most devastating thing I think anyone has to live with, male or female. And I think it's more difficult for women because there have been less support groups for women, but they're coming around, and I think that it's going to be very important in the future because you're going to find that there are going to be more and more heterosexual people who have this virus and still don't know it, but they'll be diagnosed. There'll be a surge in the next 20 years because people have been participating in having sex that's been unprotected for a long time, and it's only been in the last year or two that people, I think, are really waking up to the fact that they have got to be careful and practice safe sex. Unfortunately, I think it's too late for a lot of people. So.
Hi, Dr. Klein. Over here on your right. My question is, what is the difference between being HIV positive, having ARC, and having AIDS? Does anyone who is HIV positive now eventually develop AIDS, or do we know that at this time?
No one really knows the exact longitudinal course of being infected with the virus. It's a spectrum illness, which means that there are arbitrary distinctions between being infected, being diagnosed with ARC, and being diagnosed with AIDS. No one can tell. The statistics that you read can be misleading. It's hard to read these statistics of a large number of people and extrapolate them down to any particular person. Some people have been tested very early and are alive and are doing very well. Others, of course, that we read about have not been so fortunate. So there's no distinct answer that I can give you. It's just not known.
Okay, over here.
Hello.
Okay, my name is Steve, and I'm not a homosexual or I'm not bisexual, and I've been seriously involved with the girl for the last 3 years. Now, my main worry is if when I do go get an AIDS test, and I test negative, how will I know, or when will my worrying stop, whether I'll be tested positive within the next 3 years?
Well, if you've basically been with the same person for 3 years and you are in no other high risk
yes, but
group.
unlike, like Mark or Ann, they had to contract the virus 4 years before.
I'm sorry, what did?
Like Ann or Mark, they had to contract the virus 4 years ago. So how will I know if I test positive, let's say today, if I test negative today, how will I know that maybe 4 years later on the road I'm going to test positive?
You won't know for sure, but what the thing is they were diagnosed once they were starting to show symptoms, except for the gentleman on the end. So when you go in for a test, what it will show is antibodies in your bloodstream to the virus. You could be asymptomatic. You could have no symptoms. Usually there is a window that they would say you could be infected and test positive tomorrow, or 6 months. We now think it could be several years before your body starts making antibodies. But if you've been with the same person for 3 years and are in no other high-risk group and you've tested negative, as long as you stay with that girl, honey, you probably are okay, because probably your body would be testing positive now, even if you showed no symptoms after 3 years.
Okay.
Could I add something to that?
Certainly.
Okay, that's a real big concern, that window of when the infection takes place and when you're going to produce antibodies. It had been much more of a concern, as you can understand, with the blood banks. Dr. Saxon, Andrew Saxon here, has spoken recently that this new generation of tests, what we're seeing, the ELISA and the Western blot, are very, very specific. And the window of a potential miss of, or before someone produces antibodies, is probably in the order of 1 month. What people do say is the window is probably 6 months, but in actuality it is probably in the order of 1 month with this new generation of tests that are occurring. So I guess what is advised sometimes is that people get tested now, and if you're not putting yourself at risk, then test again in 6 months just to be doubly sure.
Thank you.
Don't go away for just a moment. A number of the certified sexologists around the country are coming out with suggestions similar to the one just made, which is that at whatever stage in the relationship you are, you and your partner, not just you, are tested, and hopefully will have a negative testing. You then are retested again and can feel relatively safe. If you're moving into a new relationship, that you are each tested and then you not have sex until after you have had a second test. If it's 30 days, fine, or whatever. And I know that this is going to be ancient history to the people sitting in this room, but in the 50s, there was actually a book that was called Sex Before Marriage that dealt with all the things that people could do besides having intercourse. And you want to know something? There were people who actually found that exciting and romantic and gave you a chance to know somebody and to see whether or not you had with all the muscles that we develop, the muscle of restraint often is the least frequently developed of lots of people that I know. And it gave you a chance to see if he or she could start and stop and continue and all sorts of wonderful things. Gosh, you guys just might rediscover some of that.
If I may interject one thing, sir, what was your name?
Mine?
Yeah.
Steve.
Steve. You say you've been involved for 3 years with the same woman, and you think after taking the test twice and testing negative, you're safe. I just want to raise one, well, you haven't taken it yet, but say you did that, and you were negative the second time around, then you wouldn't have to be careful or use condoms. How do you always know that your partner is monogamous? You take a risk there.
Well, I don't.
Right.
But I trust her. See,
well, do you trust her with your life? I'm just...
Yeah, well,
it happens.
I mean...
Yeah, that's a wonderful
What's your
point,
way
because your risk is your partner. And I think all of us have to come to terms with that.
What sure way can I find out whether she's monogamous to me or not?
Private
I mean,
detective.
to be completely honest...
A leash would help.
Chastity belts may come back. For guys, too.
Hi.
Hi.
My question is not directed towards anybody, but I was just wondering, how do, I guess, all of you feel about mandatory AIDS testing?
Does anybody want to touch that one?
I'd like to answer that. I think that mandatory testing anonymously or...
I guess either. Whichever.
See, the government is proposing programs, mandatory testing, and instead of spending valuable resources on research and development of a vaccine and cure, there's nothing that can be accomplished from mandatory testing of select populations. Mandatory testing, to have an effect, you'd have to test everybody, and that's an incredible expense. And once they test people that are positive on that large of a scale, are they going to be able to follow up with counseling? Can they afford that? And if they do, what money will be left for research? So I'm against mandatory testing.
Okay. I was just wondering because there's been talk about mandatory testing like within college students, and of course that concerns us.
I don't know if they would have mandatory testing. I understand
not
there's
mandatory,
some
but
question of
just testing in general.
voluntary testing.
Yeah.
But as somebody who has spent some time at Washington on this issue of mandatory testing, there are a couple of problems with it, which I'm sure you've read about. Number one, the antibody tests are very sensitive, and they do get back when you start trying to do back a positive. Before they find out that they're supposed to get, because they don't finish the counseling, they don't find until there's some kind of governmental agreement to confidentiality. Over tax, who is a man in his 70s, has AIDS from a blood 3-year-old grandmother with AIDS. She caught from her husband who had a bypass operation. Very scary, guys. I hope you're all registered to vote. You may think this is a joke, but there was a Proposition 64 on our duty to make sure that people with this disease are punished as positive. Are you going to put them in a concentration camp? First of all, where, as you're with a disease that may take 5 to 10 years for you to come down with it, about this, to know how scary they can be. They don't stop push for. I think mandatory testing is really going to serve no purpose in a general population. But
people such as you coming here and opening yourselves up to nothing, because what is that information going to be used for is the main question.
Like in San Francisco with the VD clinics. Syphilis in San Francisco, since this big scare with AIDS has come up, has just gone zero conversion, meaning that gay men in San Francisco were coming down every year, converting to. And this is scary because there are other things you can catch besides this, but people to accept that responsibility for themselves. I'm sorry.
We are getting down.
Morgan, I would like to congratulate you on your new movie, Deadly Illusion, which you and Billy.
Well, thank you, but that has to do with me. Let's take a question that has to do with the disease.
Okay, well, I'm getting ready to leave on that. 2 females are having sex and they contract AIDS.
I've never heard.
We're going to promote something here we just did, and really takes away from the critics. You want to disagree with that, Doctor?
Nope.
Okay.
One about blowing things out of proportion, and I suppose this ought to be aimed towards the doctor. I've looked at the huge margin are from prostitutes, IV drug users, and homosexuals. But don't you think the news media is blowing the risk to heterosexual?
The biggest problem has been the lack of attention focused on it, and it's too bad that it's taking that you cannot just stereotype people and say it is them.
I agree that people should practice safe sex, but I feel that they should have been doing that.
I'd like to respond to that. May I?
Sure.
I am so pleased that you asked this question. Males tend to do that when they cohabitate with males. All it takes is for women at the 10% level, which is ongoing in New York at this time, to start having babies, 50% of whom are going to be HIV positive, and start to think about the numbers that could be involved in something like that, particularly if issues of diagnosis are not taken into account and we go on 20 years and these children cohabitate, et cetera, et cetera. That's number one. Number two, by your own statements, as we see the rates of venereal disease go up among heterosexuals, many of us who are following this field are concerned that that really lays the path for the efficient introduction of the AIDS virus, meaning with the breakdown of the immunological system and with other kinds of venereal diseases present, it may enhance the possibility of the AIDS virus taking hold, because I'm told that one dip of the wick doesn't necessarily do it. So there you are. We can use your argument, and in fact, we can use it in a way that suggests that more needs to be done. Thank you.
If I might add one thing here, too, when you're saying, isn't it true that most of the people coming down with this are IV drug users and are gay? At this point in time, those statistics are correct. 10 years ago, none of them had it, although they were probably infected. What we've got is a time buffer zone that we could take advantage of to curb our behavior the way some of these people are curbing their behavior now. Because of the incredibly long incubation period of this disease, people who had the disease and didn't know it were communicating it for a long time before the virus was discovered. And that's what they're having to pay for now. We have the benefit of knowing about this, and we could change our behavior. Just a couple of statistics for you. I don't know how many of you read in the LA Times or the New York Times, but Governor Cuomo had the state of New York run tests in delivery rooms for the month of November and found out that 1 in 61 babies in New York City is born HIV positive right now. That's a very scary statistic. In Baltimore, they did they took anonymous blood samples of people coming into a clinic and found that women coming in for treatment, for gynecological treatment, tested about 6% HIV positive in Baltimore. Also in Jacksonville, Florida, 6% positive on women coming in. This is a very scary statistic. This was much higher than anything they expected. So those are things that you should take into consideration. At this moment, those statistics are true. But 5 years ago, 10 years ago, we didn't have those statistics, and this disease has a very long incubation period. Thank
Okay.
you.
We'd like to ask the panel now if they'd like to make sort of their closing remarks for us, sort of their last personal feelings on the issue for today. Could begin with Dr. Klein.
If you have concerns, talk with friends or come by Student Psychological Services. If people were interested in having a group about dealing with the issues of testing or about the psychosocial aspect of AIDS, we'd be glad to respond with having a group for you. Thank you.
I think what's most important, especially for all of you, is just to really believe how important it is to practice safe sex. It's so easy to get caught up in the moment, but you don't ever want to have to pay the price for it. You don't ever want to. So take your time, know the person, and practice safe sex. It won't kill you, but by not practicing it, it may.
Thanks. I think I've talked enough. But I would like to make an announcement that there is going to be at 5 p.m. today, Dr. Clark Taylor will present the Eroticizing Safer Sex Play Shop. And it's a humorous and informative program tomorrow also at noon at Ackerman Second Floor Lounge. It will be today at 5 p.m. at the Morgan Center, no relation. So, okay, it says admission is free but limited to the first 60 students. Thanks.
Just briefly, 2 sentences. One is that I think that the age of intimacy between strangers is potentially lethal, and therefore I think it has to be over. Your risk is your partner, and we all should remember that.
Just a closing statement about if you are afraid to take the test right now, but you're still thinking about it and you still need time to think about it, the only thing I can say to take care of yourself so that you maybe don't get sick is just take care of yourself health-wise and mental-wise so that when you do prepare to take the test, you're physically ready for it and mentally ready for it, because otherwise, if you're not, you could just break down. Your body could just freak at the stress because of the fact that you find out negative or positive. So just take real good care of yourself in the meantime and try to take the test if you can.
Yeah, I would like to agree with Brad. If you're considering taking the test, I would suggest taking it now while you still can anonymously. And secondly, I'd like to also make an announcement that this June, LaRouche has got another initiative on the ballot, similar to the one a year ago, for quarantining HIV people. So you might, if you're a voting age, consider that. Thank you.
Let's have a big hand for everybody on our panel.